lot of concerns about your business report and the second assessment that you're doing. So what we're going to go through today is we're just going to go through a lot of the dot points that you have to address in your actual business report and the idea of writing a business report itself. Okay, so if you still have problems with writing the business report after this, then what I would suggest that you do is you come see me on Tuesday or Thursday in the homework center so we can actually work on it. But first of all, I'd really like you to have a look through the resources that I've already put up. So that means looking at the video that I put up before, the PDF document that I put up before, and then the other PDF document as well. So there's 2 PDF documents and 1 video, okay? And go over the notes that we've gone through in class, okay? So let's have a look at what our business report actually is. So first of all, you have to become very familiar with the sample or the excerpt that they've given you in any business report, okay? So this excerpt that you've got here, this is an example of an excerpt that might also be given to you in a HSC examination, okay? So let's have a look. Jane is wanting to set up a small business as a wedding planner. She hopes that couples planning a wedding will hire her to put together a total wedding package, for which she will charge a fee. To create the type of wedding packages her customers want, she has to deal with a number of different wedding service suppliers. These include reception venues, wedding car hire businesses, photographers and video businesses, florists, printers, dressmakers and formal wear hire businesses. Jane wants to make sure she fulfills all of her legal responsibilities and she wants to have a reputation as an ethical business owner. Because she knows that most of her business will come from personal recommendations and word of mouth. Jane's biggest concern is that she doesn't know whether the other businesses she has to deal with share her principles. She wants to know how she can tell whether or not the wedding service suppliers she will be dealing with are actually legally and ethically. Because any unlawful or inappropriate activities will reflect back on her and her business. Okay? So keep in mind that the main thing that she wants the recommendation for is dealing with other businesses. Okay? So we have this whole thing where Jane's business is going to be a business that's centered around organizing other businesses. Okay? She wants this total wedding package. So she's not going to be doing all the reception venues, wedding car hire businesses, photographers and video businesses herself. Her main job will be basically organizing all of these people into one business, okay, and hiring them out and also contracting them. Okay, what she is going to be paid to do is to organize it, not to have all these things on hand. Okay, so let's go forth and see what we're actually meant to do with this excerpt. So you've been hired by Jane to write a report to help her start her business. That's a key thing just there. Okay, you have been hired. This means that you are a business consultant. Any report that you write from here on in should be under the assumption that you have been hired to help someone fix something or explain something. Okay? The next 3 words, your advice should. Okay? This report is meant to be offering advice. Okay? Advice and recommendations. So let's have a look at what you should actually be including. The first one, outline 2 advantages and disadvantages of 2 different legal structures that Jane could use. We've covered many different types of legal structures in class. And if you can't remember them, then there's a very, very simple section back in the textbook that you can look at that will give you about 8 or 10 of them. Okay? The second one is analyse the current legal responsibilities that Jane's business will have, including the responsibilities of secondary businesses, such as food businesses and reception venues. So keep in mind, one of the big things that Jane is worried about is this idea of dealing with other businesses that might not share her ethical nature and responsible nature. So Jane has to be aware of the legal responsibilities that other businesses have that she will engage with, and ensuring that they will follow them. Because if they don't follow them, remember, Jane's reputation and her business will be hurt. So she needs to know their legal responsibilities as well. Okay? So when we're looking at analyze, we're effectively saying break apart their legal responsibilities. What are they going to have? So when we're looking at food businesses, what are the legal responsibilities that that food business is going to have, and how might they impact Jane's business? The third one is recommend how Jane should organise her resources to ensure that her business will work effectively and efficiently. This should focus on operational, marketing, financial, and human resources. So we've done these 4 factors before in class quite a lot, okay, and we'll go through some of them in this third dot point, because I think this third dot point is giving a lot of you trouble in that you don't know how to actually set this out, okay. The key word there at the start though is recommend. Okay, it's recommend how she should organise her resources. So what you're going to have to do then is you're actually going to have to do what the verb says, recommend, suggest. Okay. So let's look at the basic structure of any report. Okay. So any business report you do, this is roughly the structure that it's going to have. The first up is the executive summary. So this is a quick rundown. What issues are you actually addressing? Okay. Now, in the executive summary, there should always be a broad sentence at the start relating to the purpose of the report. So in that sentence at the start, you're going to be telling me what is the actual purpose of your report. Now, the purpose of your report is to be found in the sample extract. So if we go back here, we know that the purpose of the report is to tell Jane these. Okay? And we're going to go through what an example executive statement might actually look like, or an executive summary, my apologies. Okay? You should be making sure that you use syllabus terms when writing the specific purpose. That means going over your syllabus, looking at the dot points, and looking at the terminology that we've gone through in class, and putting it into your actual executive summary. So don't make up your own language, use the language of the syllabus. Now, when we're looking at the body, this is when you're actually addressing the dot points. So we saw the 3 dot points that you have to do, okay? You address these dot points when you're doing the body, okay? Now, these dot points shouldn't be answered in the manner that you'd normally answer an essay like you would in English and history. They should come under different headings, okay? Now, this is pretty similar to the way that you might do a science report, and that you wouldn't just write the science report in this whole big essay style. You'd be breaking it down into parts, under headings, and also underneath different subheadings, okay? So you may choose to have subheadings under individual headings, such as a subheading for each of the functions in the third section. So when you're coming to the third section, which are organising her resources, you might have one heading called organising resources, and then the next 4 subheadings might be, you might have a subheading for operational, marketing, financial, and human resources, and address them all in separate ways, rather than trying to just smash them all into one paragraph and making it really confusing. With this third section, you're meant to give your recommendation. And this is basically your closing argument or your conclusion. And it's important to remember here that you are a consultant. You have been asked for your opinion on this one. Just keep in mind, just because you've been asked for your opinion doesn't mean that you should start using I, we, and my. Okay, you are still writing in the third person, but you're giving an opinion. Okay, and you're giving that recommendation. So, what does your report actually look like? Well, there's 2 things that it might actually look like. The first is a scientific report or an experiment, okay? You know that when you do a scientific report or an experiment one, that it's going to be broken down into very specific sections and headings, hypothesis, method, what you actually saw in the report, conclusions/findings, and things like that. The same as when you're doing a food or TAS report or recipe format, okay? you know what to look at for one of those, and you know that for both of those reports, it's not just massive essays, they are broken down into chunks that make it easier for the person to read. Remember that your report is for a client, and your client does not want to read a big old essay. They want it broken down into chunks that they can look to at future notice. Okay, so when they're looking at legal structures, they want to be able to easily find where legal structures is on that report so they can look over their notes rather than having to read 3 paragraphs just to find where it is again. When we're looking at things that your business report shouldn't look like, it shouldn't look like a history essay, it shouldn't look like an English essay, okay, where you just have this big mess of writing. It also shouldn't look like a maths examination where it's just formula after formula and diagrams, okay. There is a bit of a mixture between the two of these. So things that you should attempt to include in your actual business report. Number 1 is you should try to include brainstorms and mind maps showing off your knowledge. For example, if a question asks you to choose between 2 different legal structures, you can draw a diagram to show all the ones you know and then highlight the 2 you will discuss in depth. So what you might choose to do is you might do a mind map of legal structures. So you have legal structures in the middle, and then you have all the branch offs coming off that in a big mind map of all the different types of legal structures. Okay, what this does is this shows that you actually have knowledge of the different types of legal structures that are out there. Okay, and this is perfectly fine to have in your report. You're allowed to have diagrams, okay? Even if you wanted to draw a mind map, if that's a bit easier for some of you, okay, rather than having to do it all on PowerPoint or whatever program you're using, scan it in and paste that picture in there. That's perfectly fine, okay? And then from that mind map, you can highlight the 2 that you're going to be discussing in depth, which will lead us on to our next part, okay? So also you should be including tables and graphs, okay? All your information does not have to be shown in a murder of paragraphs, okay? I don't want to see paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. If you're choosing to write in a paragraph style, then at least it should be broken up with tables, graphs, and diagrams, okay? If I get a whole essay with no diagrams or anything like that, I'll be disappointed, okay? For example, when comparing advantages and disadvantages of legal structures, why not show it in a table? Okay, you can show the differences between those 2 legal structures in a table. There is no reason saying it has to be in a massive essay paragraph format, so long as it gives the required detailed information and actually makes it easier to access for your client. So if you're choosing to do it in that table format, it should be easier to access than a paragraph. If your table is more confusing than a paragraph, then you've done it wrong. Okay, you're putting in diagrams, figures, and everything like that to actually make it make more sense to your client. Okay. So one of the other things that I've had a lot of discussions with people about is this: should I be using paragraphs or should I be using dot points? Okay. Keep in mind, there is nothing saying that your report has to be either paragraphs or dot points. You can choose to have one or you can have both. Okay. Now, for me, I would recommend having this little mixture of both. It's in between both that heaven lies. Okay. When you choose to have one over the other, it does tend to complicate things. Both is better, and I'll show you what I mean by how to include both when we're looking at things like the executive summary. Okay. So let's look at paragraphs, okay? Advantages and disadvantages of choosing to make your report in those. So your advantages of paragraphs are you're used to it from previous subjects. Most of you are coming from subjects or from just junior years in general where you're very, very used to writing in paragraph format peel, which would actually help you in compiling all your ideas together. It's also easier in a paragraph to use your flowery language, okay, and bluff your way through things. So even if you might not actually be answering the question, you have a chance of bluffing it just from your flowery language. And when you're using paragraphs, just because you're using paragraphs does not mean you cannot include mind maps and tables. You can still include those and also refer to them in your paragraphs. The disadvantages of using paragraphs, and this is something I've gleaned from talking to a couple of HSC markers of business studies, is they find when people use paragraphs in their business reports, it's much easier to waffle on. Even though you're writing in a more academic fashion, you might not be addressing the question. You're sort of just writing for the sake of writing it. You're also forced to write in a very specific fashion, which may limit your ability to answer questions in a quick manner because you've constantly got to go through this sort of peel format or whatever format that you're using. It's not allowing you to answer the question as quickly and concisely as you could. Dot points have advantages and disadvantages as well. The advantages are that they allow you to be concise and avoid the waffle. And you don't have to worry about paragraph structure too much when we're actually doing dot points. The problem with dot points, as we've talked about with the HSC markers, is they do tend to be too brief and not relate to the business specifically. We often find that when people are using dot points, they're sort of just relating to this HSC terminology, but when they are given that business scenario and they're writing wholly in dot points, they don't relate that terminology to the actual scenario they're meant to be relating to. It's also important to remember that just because you're in dot points doesn't mean it's one word answers. You still need full and comprehensible sentences. No one word answers, okay? Full sentences. Each dot point should really be about 2 sentences, okay? So don't fall into that trap thinking that you can just do a couple of words and move on to the next dot point. So let's look at this executive summary, okay? So the words that I've given you here, feel free to steal, okay? There is nothing wrong with using these sentences that I've given you here in your own business report. If I see them in your assessment task when it's handed in, you will not be marked down, you will not be marked up. I will simply be I'll be marking it like any other thing that you would have written yourself, okay? So if you wanted to start off with your executive summary, and I know a lot of you are having just trouble with the first 2 sentences, okay? Let's have a look here. This report will address the concerns that Jane has with her potential wedding planning business. Specifically, this report will look at. Now, this is of course where you'd go into those 3 dot points, okay? So you can see here that the very first 2 sentences are just meant to be saying, look, this is what the report's going to be talking about, okay? And this is what we're going to be looking at in depth. Now, another sentence that you might have in that executive summary is, this report will also recommend blah, okay? Now, seeing as you've got this sentence going, this report will also recommend, it would suggest that you do your executive summary after you've actually done all your bodies. Because you don't know what you're summarizing in your executive summary unless you've finished the bodies. Okay? So keep that in mind. So, when we're looking at the body, this is a sample for the first dot point that you will do. Okay, so this is the dot point about legal structures. So if we were going to answer something in the body section, this is how we might do it. For starters, we might be writing a small paragraph about different legal structures and the ones Jane might use, okay? So we would write a small paragraph going, hey, look, there's actually a huge variety of different legal structures and this is what they are, okay? This is what a legal structure is. And you might be using something like this. This is only 2 to 3 sentences, okay? After this small paragraph that we've written, and keep in mind it can go a bit longer than 2 or 3, but not too much longer, you want to maybe incorporate a mind map to demonstrate your knowledge of the different forms of legal structures. Okay, so make a mind map, legal structures in the middle, and go, okay, sole trader, partnership, blah, 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 blah. Okay. This will show that you actually have a broad base of knowledge that you're calling on. Following that, you would use tables to compare the advantages and disadvantages of two different legal structures. Okay? Because remember, that's what the question's also asking you to do. It's asking you to show a bit of knowledge about legal structures, but then give two legal structures that would be useful to Jane. Make sure the two that you pick would actually be useful to Jane, and go, okay, Jane, look, here's the advantages and the disadvantages of two different legal structures. And you might even have a little thing just at the end of that table going, yes, Jane, you can see the advantages and disadvantages of both. It might be recommended that you choose this one over the other one because it has more advantages or reference one of the advantages, okay? So you might choose to do a very small paragraph after that table that you've just done, okay? But you can see here that you wouldn't just be writing in this big mess of a paragraph, okay? Small paragraph, diagram, table, maybe a small paragraph to follow after that. Now, an important thing to keep in mind here is this is just a sample, okay? You may choose to write this first dot point exactly like this, okay? That's fine, I do not care, as long as you do it properly, okay? But you might choose to write the first dot point or the second and third dot points in a completely different manner. So long as it's clear and concise to the client, but also has the necessary detail that the client needs to understand what you're telling them, then that's great. Okay, this is just simply a sample way of doing it. Now, the third section, okay, this is just a small little a helper on this, okay? First of all, you don't have to cover all options equally. Only the ones that you feel are related to the actual business, okay? So we have operations, marketing, finance, and human resources. Now, you should attempt to cover each one of those in at least a very little fashion, okay? But you might not have the same amount of things for human resources as you do for marketing, okay? And that's okay. You simply have to be able to justify why you didn't have the exact same for each and why one was more important than the other, okay? So for some, you might only have 2 or 3 dot points that you're not going to explain in great detail, okay? For others, you might actually do small paragraphs for explaining. Now, this one's really important because I've had a lot of questions about this that would be answered quite easily if people just check the cheat sheet, okay? Check the cheat sheet. It's going to tell you a lot of different things about the things that you could put in for each one of those functions. Now, also keep in mind, you can have overlap in the organisation of resources. For example, some of the points you put in operations, like where Jane might set up, might work with human resources as well, because where you set up is going to change the quality of human resources that you have available to you. Okay, so there can be overlap. Don't feel like human resources has to be completely divorced and separate from operations. And remember that you're recommending things here. So for example, finance. What method of finance would you actually recommend to Jane to safeguard her business? Okay. The key word and verb in this dot point is recommend. Okay, so always remember that you should be recommending something. So you're giving them the information, but you're recommending as well. Okay. Now, one of the things that I'd really like to emphasize on this is this report is only meant to be 1,500 words at a max. And I'm not saying it should be 1,500 words, I'm saying it shouldn't be over 1,500 words. And there's a key difference in that. If you're writing over 1,500 words, then it's impossible for you to do this in an examination scenario. And this is the sort of scenario that they can actually ask you to do in prelim and HSC. Okay, you are asked to write a business report. So if you're writing over 1,500 in this normal situation, what it means is that when you get to the examination, you're going to be trying to write 2,000 words and you're just simply going to run out of time. Okay, that's why we've set the 1,500 word limit on this, not because I'm trying to be difficult, but because we're trying to make this easier for you for the exams. So keep this in mind, and it's also worth keeping in mind a 1,500 word limit. Okay, really, you probably wouldn't want to go over 1,200 to be fair, but if you're aiming for 1,200, 1,500 word limit, you'd very quickly realize going, I can't write a paragraph for every single one of these things, otherwise I'm very quickly going to go over that limit. Okay, so I want you to think about these things. And remember, check the PDFs, the documents, the PowerPoints and videos before you go ask a question, okay? Also remember to talk to each other. A lot of you have great ideas regarding this that would be very beneficial if you simply just talk to each other, okay? And you can still email me afterwards. Now, we have drafts coming in this weekend. Some of these drafts might change with the information that you've just been given in this video. So make sure you suggest that even people that have written drafts before to watch this video as well, okay? And just keep in mind, it's not meant to break you, this one, okay? And if you're struggling with it, do ask. So have a good weekend, girls, those of you that are watching this on the weekend, and just stay safe.